in collaboration with our friend Luke at the channel Revere 0311. On the morning of the 18th of January 1781, and one day after the Battle of Cowpens, an exhausted and defeated Colonel Bannister Tarleton rides into British General Cornwallis's camp. All eyes watch as he approaches his furious commander and explains, perhaps ashamed, that General Morgan and the Continentals have not only defeated him, but captured close to 1,000 men. Cornwallis is left in disbelief. His campaign is already not going to plan. So far, victories have been indecisive, while defeats are increasingly disastrous. And now Cowpens reduces his field army to just 2,500 men, with the rest of his forces tied down fighting partisans across South Carolina and Georgia. In New York, General Clinton, Commander-in-Chief of British forces, is growing concerned about the situation and instructs Cornwallis to be on the defensive, consolidating his forces while avoiding costly inland campaigns and any further disasters. Clinton and Lord Germain in London fully understand that outright victory in the war is unlikely, and now, ahead of anticipated peace talks, believe that they must concentrate their efforts on securing as much territory in the lucrative South as possible. But Cornwallis vehemently disagrees with Clinton's more passive strategy and believes that his only chance of victory in the South is to find and defeat the Continental Army, while expanding British control into North Carolina to reduce Continental supplies being sent south to the partisans. The next day, on the 19th of January, Cornwallis, eager to strike while his enemy is divided, sets out on a campaign that will make or break British control in the South. General Morgan, fresh from his tactical masterstroke against Tarleton, has also started moving his army. He plans for a delaying action and marches to cover the Catawba River. Although initially leading from the front in his usual style, Morgan's health has taken a significant turn for the worse. Plagued by chronic illnesses, he is soon bedbound in camp, to his deep frustration. General Greene, meanwhile, commanding Continental forces in the South, has over 2,000 men, including 1,400 regulars and some 800 militia. However, his army has been shrinking as militia enlistments end and men go home, despite Greene's pleas for them to stay. Splitting his army weeks earlier had been a gamble that paid off well at Cowpens. But now, and after hearing of Cornwallis's advance, he starts moving to reunite with Morgan and present a united front. His orders from his commander-in-chief, General Washington, are to exhaust the British in a war of attrition, avoid costly defeats, and crush Loyalist resolve in the South. Against General Clinton's wishes, Cornwallis is now marching deep into the inhospitable forests, swamps, and muddy roads of the Carolinas backcountry. He aims to find and defeat Greene, or at least force him over the Dan River and out of North Carolina. With the January rains, the march is miserable and the British struggle to keep track of their enemy. At Cowpens, Cornwallis had lost the majority of his light troops, who typically act as the army's eyes and ears. He is left with mostly regiments of the line, deadly on the battlefield, but not used to the kind of lightning advances that Cornwallis is hoping for. Desperate to increase the speed of his army, Cornwallis now takes a radical step, and one perhaps even more unorthodox than Greene's decision to split his army months earlier. Cornwallis burns his baggage train. Everything non-essential is thrown on a huge fire, including tents, wagons, excess food, clothing, and even the army's cherished rum supplies, leaving the soldiers cold, wet, and to their horror, sober. Whatever the army needed would now be carried on their backs. Cornwallis sets the example by burning his personal effects, including fine china, silverware, and wine. These actions are unprecedented and sends a clear message, epitomised by a senior officer. It was resolved that we would follow Greene's army to the end of the world. What would soon be called the race to the Dan had begun. By the 30th of January, Greene and Morgan finally reunite their forces. A war council is held on the banks of the Catawba River, and as they talk, Cornwallis is seen on the opposite bank, watching on through a spyglass. The situation is tense, and Greene fears he does not have the strength to stop the British fording one of the many crossing points along the river. The decision is made for the Continentals to retreat to Salisbury, while the 800-strong militia under General Davidson is to stay and fight a delaying action if the British attempt to cross. In the early hours of the 1st of February, a fog hangs over Cowpens Ford, which stretches 500 yards from bank to bank. The British Army, with unloaded muskets, creeps slowly into the river. Cornwallis is at the front, while Patriot sentries sleep at their posts in the distance. The water gets to chest height as the regulars cross, and the fast current soon sweeps unlucky men away. As the British get midstream, the sound of drowning men is finally heard by shocked sentries, and the alarm is raised. Within minutes, a torrent of fire is unleashed into the crossing mass of redcoats. Cornwallis's horse is hit several times, along with a number of his men. Patriot General Davidson arrives and surveys the scene, encouraging his men and organising the defences. Soon, the British are desperately scrambling up the riverbank and returning fire of their own in chaotic close-quarter fighting. In the confusion, Davidson is shot dead from his horse. His loss quickly puts the militia to flight, ending the battle prematurely and enabling the British to cross. The attack had been daring by Cornwallis and could well have ended in disaster. It is also lightly costly. He reports just 40 casualties, but the real number is no doubt higher. A troubling start for his small army. As the British column moves forward, both armies are now racing to the next major river, the Yadkin, on roads thick with mud thanks to the near constant torrential rain. Both sides suffer greatly in the miserable conditions. On the march, British and German soldiers burn a number of houses, and with Tarleton's legion menacing the area, Greene's militiamen start to abandon the army to find their families. Despite being further behind, the British soon catch up, but not before Greene is able to make the dangerous crossing by boat, and once again, the two generals face off across a swollen river. As the British look for a safe ford to cross, the Continentals arrive at Guilford Court House. There, the highly capable Daniel Morgan, with his ailments getting worse, finally leaves the army for home. A severe loss for Greene. To make matters worse, the Patriot militia is continuing to evaporate, accelerated by news of Cornwallis's approach. Outnumbered and outclassed, Greene makes the difficult decision to continue the retreat. A fresh and final race soon begins to the Dan River, where Tarleton and his opposite number, Light Horse Harry Lee, spar off on the roads north. In minor skirmishes, Lee's legion hold off the British, while screening the direction of Greene's retreat. Cornwallis pushes his army hard and almost to breaking point, even marching through the night, desperate to get ahead of the Continentals. The Dan River is wide, and the British rightly assume that any crossing will be a difficult and timely affair. But Greene's relentless planning and attention to detail is about to pay off. Days earlier, Greene had ordered that boats be massed at Irwin's Ferry, which he now promptly uses to cross the river and escape into Virginia. Just hours later, Cornwallis arrives to see his enemy once again on the opposite side of a riverbank. A crushing sight for his men after marching an impressive 40 miles in 31 hours. Their only problem was, the Continentals had done it in 20. With the Continentals across the Dan, the British were now at least the only remaining army in North Carolina. But in 17 days, they had been drawn in over 250 miles, lost almost 500 men, and only directly controlled a small portion of the territory. Exhausted and hungry, Cornwallis moves to Hillsborough to arrest and recruit local militias. While the Continentals enjoy well-organised supplies in Virginia, discipline starts to rapidly break down in the British camp. Soldiers break off to steal food or whiskey, despite severe threats from Cornwallis to stop. The looting makes the army unpopular, severely damaging recruitment efforts. Yet Greene's position is far from perfect. Although his Continentals have remained in good spirits, his militia has shrunk to less than 100, and he knows the British predicament will slowly improve if unchallenged. Local Tories would eventually mobilise, and supplies from the Royal Navy arrive. To keep Patriot hopes alive in North Carolina, Light Horse Harry and his legion quietly slip back across the Dan River. On the afternoon of the 25th of February, 400 local loyalists have responded to Cornwallis's requests and gathered to join the British. As they march, they are on the lookout for Tarleton and his legion, who have been ordered to escort them to Hillsborough. Ahead on the road, the green-jacketed cavalrymen appear, and cheers soon erupt. Relieved to see the famed Tarleton, friendly banter and cries of "God save the King" ring out as the cavalry move alongside the loyalists, who salute and compliment the militia in return as they slowly ride past. But all is not as it seems. Unfortunately for the North Carolinian loyalists, Light Horse Harry's legion also wear green jackets and have been moving across the backcountry pretending to be Tarleton's legion for days now. What followed was quick and bloody. Without warning, Lee's dragoons wheel around and charge their loyalist countrymen with sabres and pistols. Within minutes, almost 100 stunned men are cut down dead, many begging for mercy from who they still believe to be allies and friends. The action is soon over, and the survivors flee to their homes. Later that evening, a number of loyalist prisoners would be murdered, with cries of "Remember Buford," continuing the never-ending cycle of violence and retaliation in civil war. Pyle's massacre, as it would soon be known, would have disastrous consequences for the British. Unlike the Battle of Waxhaws a year earlier, where Colonel Buford's Continentals were similarly cut down by Tarleton's legion, this action would have the opposite effect. Whereas Waxhaw had inflamed Patriot passions and rallied support, Pyle's massacre does the reverse. Loyalist morale is devastated, and further recruitment halted overnight. On the 22nd of February, Greene recrosses the Dan in force. For the next 3 weeks, the two generals once again play cat and mouse in North Carolina. But this time, Greene's army is growing. With arriving reinforcements, he soon has almost 1,800 Continentals and 2,600 militia, compared to Cornwallis's 2,000 regulars and provincials. Feeling finally ready to confront his enemy, Greene moves back to Guilford Court House, where only weeks earlier he had carefully examined the ground. As the British arrive, the cavalries once again skirmish ahead of the main bodies. The fighting is indecisive, but Tarleton loses several fingers during the encounter. The scene is finally set for a decisive battle in North Carolina.
Hey there, Vero 311, former Marine infantryman, Revolutionary War reenactor, and amateur history enthusiast. Now let's start this video.
Today I'm going to run through how the Continental and British militaries were organized and fought during the American Revolutionary War. At the start of 1775, there was no unified military force representing all 13 colonies. Instead, individual colonies, especially those in New England, raised their own regiments in response to the battles of Lexington and Concord. These regiments formed a loosely organized force known as the Army of Observation. It was this ad hoc army that surrounded the British in Boston during the spring and early summer of 1775. In June of 1775, the Second Continental Congress formally brought together the various colonial militias into a single force known as the Continental Army. Appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief, this marked the official creation of a unified American army. The name Continental Army reflected its purpose to defend not just one colony or region, but all 13 colonies as a unified front. Unlike the regionally focused local militias, the Continental Army was a national force, raised by Congress designed to fight across the entire continent. And it did, from the frozen gates of Quebec to the swamps of Florida. It was this army that fought directly in opposition to British rule. But in its infancy, this army had a variety of problems to overcome. Enlistments were short, typically lasting only until the end of the calendar year. As a result, just as soldiers were beginning to grasp the basics of soldiering and how to operate effectively as a unit, their terms expired and thousands of trained men left the ranks. To Washington's great frustration, he had to rebuild the army year after year with inexperienced recruits. In September of 1776, Congress adopted Washington's proposal for a standing army of 88 regiments, with soldiers enlisted for 3 years or the duration of the war. This was a turning point. Though states still struggled to meet quotas and recruitment remained uneven, it provided Washington and Continental commanders like Nathanael Greene with a more dependable core of veteran soldiers who could be trained, retrained, and relied upon across multiple campaigns. Further reforms followed in 1778 and 1779. During the harsh winter at Valley Forge, Baron von Steuben introduced standardized drills and procedures. His Blue Book revolutionized training, standardized movements, improved musket handling by simplifying the drill, and enforcing discipline, marking a major milestone to the creation of a professional fighting force. By 1780, financial pressures and a shortage of manpower forced another reorganization. The army was reduced to 50 regiments of about 500 men each. Specialist roles like light infantry, engineers, and combined armed legions were introduced, creating a smaller but more versatile force. The British Army, by contrast, was a well-organized machine at the outbreak of the war, and, contrary to popular opinion, was well prepared to fight a less than traditional war in the backwoods of North America. General Howe had written a light infantry manual in 1774, attaching a light company to each regiment, specifically for skirmishing, guerrilla warfare, and independent movement. Numbers fluctuated throughout the war, but approximately half of the entire British Army was deployed to the Americas. At its height, some 35,000 men across the 13 colonies in Canada. This meant that for much of the war, the British could field twice the amount of regulars than the Continentals. Throughout the war, the British Army was an adaptable force suited for warfare in North America, with General Clinton in particular creating a greater emphasis on light infantry and flexible operations. The British also made use of German auxiliaries throughout the war, referred to by the Americans as Hessians, even though they came from a variety of German states. These German formations were full of professional soldiers. British combat power was also supplemented by units of Americans who stayed loyal to the king, though often underappreciated, these American loyalists would spend the war fighting their fellow countrymen. Now let's talk regiments in particular. This administrative and fighting unit was the backbone of every 18th century army. Regiments at full strength were typically 500 to 700 men strong, but the realities of attrition on campaigning could dwindle the regiment down to a few hundred men. The regiment was a soldier's home, identity, and primary formation on the battlefield. Each regiment usually consisted of a single battalion, the tactical unit that maneuvered and fought as a whole during combat. 2 to 4 regiments or battalions could be grouped together to form a brigade, usually formed for ad hoc missions and led by a brigadier general. A major general may then control a wing or a large operational force, while a lieutenant general could oversee an entire theater of war, second only to the commander-in-chief, the most senior rank in the army. During the war, British and Continental regiments functioned in the same way. Both were led by a colonel, or more typically, a lieutenant colonel in the British Army. Each company was typically led by a captain who was supported by a lieutenant and then an ensign, 2 sergeants, 3 corporals, 1 drummer, and around 60 privates. Each regiment typically contained 8 line and 2 flank companies, 1 flank company of grenadiers, the other light infantry. The line companies functioned as the disciplined corps of the regiment, trained to deliver volleys in formation and hold the main battle line during engagements. On the battlefield, a regiment would deploy in companies in a row of some 200 feet long and 2 men deep. The men would rarely be shoulder to shoulder and more typically formed in an open order about an arm's length apart. The grenadiers would be made up of the tallest and strongest of the regiment and were used as elite shock troops in the field. Light companies would be made up of the fittest men of the regiment and were used for reconnaissance, skirmishing, and ambushing. They were often trained on individual accuracy and wore trimmed down uniforms. In North America, it wasn't uncommon for these flank companies to be grouped together to form a new light or grenadier battalion, creating elite or specialized formations. British line infantry were commonly armed with the 10-pound land pattern 75 caliber smoothbore military flintlock musket, better known today as the Brown Bess. Fitted with a bayonet lug that also functioned as a front sight, this iconic British firearm would remain in service well into the 19th century. Continental soldiers, by contrast, lacked uniformity in arms and carried a wide variety of muskets. These included locally produced arms, captured British arms, and imported muskets from France, Spain, and the Netherlands. The most significant supplier was France, providing over 100,000 infantry muskets during the war. Firing either musket required a practiced, multi-step loading process, and with proper drill, a trained soldier could deliver up to 3 rounds a minute in combat. To maximize the effectiveness of a musket, commanders aimed to hold fire until the enemy was within roughly 50 yards. Although skirmishing and exchanges often began at greater distances, leaders like Washington cautioned against throwing away your fire at too early or too great of a distance. If troops could hold their fire until a closer range, you had a better chance of delivering a devastating first volley. Once firing began, thick clouds of black powder smoke obscured visibility and the deafening noise disrupted command and control. Soldiers often began firing independently, creating a continuous, yet disorganized barrage of gunfire. It was in this confusion that drummers and large regimental flags became vital tools, helping maintain order, relay commands, and keep units together amidst the smoke and noise. This is also where the experience of a unit would pay off large dividends for their commanders. Other specialized units like cavalry were adapted to the tough terrain of North America. Lighter and more flexible dragoon units were especially useful. These were troops trained to fight on horseback, and they were often used for reconnaissance, raiding, patrolling, and skirmishing. Both sides also fielded mixed units that combined infantry and cavalry. Leaders like Light Horse Harry Lee, father of future Confederate General Robert E. Lee, and the British officer Banastre Tarleton commanded elite legions made up of fast-moving, motivated dragoons and light infantry. These legions could operate independently, move fast through rough terrain, launch surprise ambushes on foot, or deliver sudden saber charges on horseback, making them a serious threat on the battlefield. Artillery was typically deployed in batteries between 2 and 6 guns, positioned to disrupt enemy formations and support infantry advances. The most common field pieces were smoothbore guns, ranging from 3 to 12 pounders. This unit of measurement is referring to the weight of the solid shot that they fired. These guns typically fired solid round shot. Heavy iron balls used to smash through enemy lines, batter fortifications, or ricochet across open ground to cause maximum disruption. At closer range, they could be loaded with canister or grape shot, anti-personnel rounds packed with small iron balls that scattered on firing, cutting down anyone in their path.
So that will wrap up the overview of how the armies were organized, equipped, and fought during the American Revolutionary War. It's interesting to see how the Continental Army evolves throughout the entire war. At the beginning, it is really built around that nucleus in New England, but by the end of the war, it is full of professional soldiers that are in the duration for the length of the war. There is a lot of problems with this Continental Army all the way till the end. There are problems with pay. There's even a mutiny in 1781, but those are stories for another day. If you want to see more content focused, particularly on the firearms, check out my channel, Revero 311. And I love doing deep dives into historical pieces such as this. This is an original French infantry musket, a model 1766, and it even has the initials of the soldier carved into the buttstock. If you want to see other videos of me shooting reproductions, in which I shoot single ball, double ball, and I test out different buck and ball loadouts, again, check out the video. Again, thank you to Tristan from History Rebels for allowing me to be part in this video. And now back to the much better narrator. Take care.
At Guilford Court House, the Continental Army rises early on the 15th of March, 1781. Eats its breakfast, and deploys to the battlefield. General Greene has decided to borrow from Morgan's success at Cowpens, deploying his army in 3 lines. The first contains his least reliable troops, about 1,500 North Carolinian militiamen, many of them raw, stationed behind a fence looking across an open field. To support the nervous men, Greene places 200 riflemen and cavalry units on either flank, with artillery in the center. His second line in thick woods comprises the Virginia militia, who, despite having seen action before, are untrusted after their shameful retreat at Camden the previous year. Their commander, Brigadier General Stevens, is determined that this will not happen again, and he places 40 picked riflemen behind the line, with orders to shoot any man that runs. Greene's third and main line sits in a clearing, comprising 1,500 Continentals, with regiments from Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the British Army slowly becomes visible, having marched 12 miles that morning to the sound of drums and Highland bagpipes. Cornwallis believes he faces 10,000 men. He cannot see most of his enemy, and he is ignorant of the terrain, but he moves his 2,000 men forward nonetheless. The army is tattered and without breakfast, but after marching hundreds of miles, they are utterly determined to meet the Continentals. As the British steadily move forward, the nerve of the North Carolinian militia is about to be tested. As the anticipation increases, the supporting cannon is withdrawn to the third line. The militia have orders to fire twice and then retire in good order. As the British come within range, the volleys begin, with somewhat sporadic but deadly accuracy. The British are moving slower than planned through the muddy field and pause to return fire before turning to their bayonets. By this point, many in the militia have fired twice, while some not at all. Regardless, it was now time to leave. The line withdraws, except for the riflemen on the wings, but unlike at Cowpens, there would be no rallying the majority of the men, who flee in all directions. The British push on, dispatching units to drive off the riflemen and their now deadly enfilade fire. As the main line begins to enter the thick woods in front of them, their formations lose cohesion. They are soon at the second line of Virginians, and the battle becomes increasingly confused as both sides trade volleys. 2 Virginian regiments collapse early on the right, but many keep fighting in small groups of men. Commanders on both sides are in the thick of the fighting, and Stevens is hit in the leg and carried from the field. Cornwallis too has his horse shot from under him, and at one point finds himself alone in no man's land, being luckily rescued by a nearby sergeant. For the most part, the Virginians put up stiff resistance, as the fighting descends into a series of skirmishes from small groups of men, slugging it out in dense woods. Although the Virginians are slowly forced to retreat, many have fired 15 to 20 shots, leaving ground now littered with the dead and dying. Their commanders, including Stevens, no doubt proud to finally put the shame of Camden behind them. With the second line mostly broken, some British regiments now start to slowly emerge from the woodline. A few hundred yards ahead of them, they can see the blue-coated Continentals in good order waiting for them. The British left, light infantry and German Jaegers do not hesitate or wait for reinforcements and immediately charge up to face them. The British battle line is in complete disarray, and the attack is unsupported and vulnerable. The Continental veterans hold their fire, waiting patiently until the British are within 30 yards. The volley is devastating, and the British commander, Brigadier General Webster, is hit, mortally wounded, along with many of his men, who now start to waver and step back. At this critical moment, the battle hangs in the balance, with victory possible for either side. Greene may well have been tempted to launch a counterattack and hit his divided and wounded opponent. Such a move could shatter the British or put his own army to flight. Greene does not roll the dice and instead holds his commanding position. With the pause, the cream of Cornwallis's army, the Second Guards, have cleared the woods and are now marching quickly to aid their comrades. The elite guards, without stopping to fire, are soon moving up on the right and closing against the fresh recruits of the 2nd Maryland Regiment. Relying on bayonets alone is a risk, particularly against fellow regulars, as Webster had just discovered on the left. But this time the terrifying speed of the guards has its planned effect, and without firing a shot, the 2nd Marylanders break. Upon seeing their sister regiment retreat, the veteran 1st Marylanders turn and engage the guards. Soon, muzzle to muzzle, ferocious volleys are exchanged. The fighting intensifies in bloody deadlock between perhaps the two best formations in each army. Amongst the smoke and chaos, a cavalry bugle is suddenly heard. Like at Cowpens, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington has been waiting patiently for an opportunity, and his dragoons now swing behind the isolated guards, charging through their ranks with slashing sabers. The guards are left disjointed and shocked, but not yet broken. As the dragoons wheel around to make another pass, they are joined by the 1st Maryland Regiment, who surge forward with bayonets. The hand-to-hand fighting is intense, and in the shouting, stabbing, and clubbing, the Guards' Lieutenant Colonel is killed by a Maryland captain in a bloody duel. Both sides fight on. Cornwallis has been watching in horror for several minutes from the tree line, and well understands the danger. His most elite regiment will be slaughtered if they break down the hill, which may well lead to a general collapse like at Cowpens. Accounts vary with what happens next, but it is likely that Cornwallis, without hesitating and ignoring protesting officers, orders his artillery to fire grape shot at the mass of struggling soldiers on the hill. The cannons roar, to the dismay of onlookers, and men on both sides are struck down. Although a difficult decision, the grape shot has the intended effect. both sides scatter back to their own lines. For Cornwallis, the danger has passed, and with reinforcements ready, he prepares a fresh assault. Greene, however, conscious of keeping his army together and wary of another continental defeat, now moves to disengage and pulls his army back in good order, ending the battle. The British had won the day, and the army had performed bravely in taking the field against a force twice its size. But at what cost and to what end? The British had taken over 500 casualties, more than a quarter of the army, and some of their best troops had taken the brunt of it, the Second Guards alone taking 50% casualties. Continental losses are reported at 263 dead and wounded, although these figures were often underestimated, particularly for the militia. Nevertheless, Greene has kept the bulk of his army intact while leaving the British in a fragile position. Cornwallis had repeatedly rolled the dice to finally get the showdown and victory he craved, leaving him as the apparent master of the Carolinas. After the battle, he moves back to Hillsborough and claims that North Carolina is under British control. But in reality, Cornwallis's victory has been Pyrrhic. In less than 6 months, his field army had shrunk from some 4,500 men to now less than 1,500 fit to fight. Burning his supplies had left his men permanently hungry and forced to plunder local farms, while any hope of a loyalist resurgence had been decimated. Worse still, the campaign had done nothing to stop supplies moving south to the partisans, as little of the province is under practical British control. In Hillsborough, after 3 weeks of next to no local support or supplies, Cornwallis is finally forced to abandon the backcountry and marches, vanquished, to Wilmington and the coast to refit and resupply with the Royal Navy. Although Greene had suffered a tactical battlefield defeat, he had succeeded strategically in the campaign, achieving all his objectives and chiefly exhausting the British army. Although some would criticize the retreat across North Carolina and for not counterattacking during the battle, Greene has set the stage and a strong foundation for future success. By April, Greene cautiously shadows his opponent towards the coast, while his eye begins to turn to the now vulnerable south. Thank you for watching our series on the American Revolution, and of course, a huge thanks as well to our Patreon and YouTube supporters. Join now to get early access and vote on future videos. Thanks again, and until next time.